Welcome to the Therapeutic Food Solutions podcast. I'm your host, Marian Mitchell. I'm an integrative nutrition health coach, therapeutic diet expert, and founder of The Road to Living Whole. There are many different diets out there. It's hard to know which one is right for you with your chronic illness and autoimmune disease. In this podcast, I'm going to share with you the foundational pieces every single therapeutic diet out there shares, and also how to use the best one for your particular diagnosis. If you've been looking for a meal planning partner, help navigating the complicated healthcare system, and want to feel better quickly, I'm your girl. Grab your kombucha and notebook. Let's dive in. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I have Dr. Vrzal, we call him Dr. V, back on the podcast. And
I'm so honored.
I'm so excited to have you back. In our last episode, we talked about headaches and where they can originate from and how to help them, which is a huge problem, especially for women. Today, we're going to dive deeper into applied kinesiology. And like I was telling you before we started recording, I'm in a lot of mom groups, natural mom groups and things like that.
Right.
And applied kinesiology comes up as a resource for people when they're dealing with different things. But what I've noticed is nobody really knows how to describe it. They're just like, it works. And
Right.
you specialize in that. You can talk about the headaches and thyroid and autoimmune and all this stuff, and how applied kinesiology can really help. So that's what we're going to dive into today. And I'm sure we're going to go much deeper than that because we always do.
Right.
But for those who are listening and maybe haven't heard our last episode, can you do a brief introduction of who you are? And then let's dive into the topic of the day.
Thank you. And thank you again for the opportunity. I'm honored to be invited back. So Dr. Scott Vrzal, I have a book coming out called The Headache Advantage. It is listed on Amazon in pre-launch. And so that will, the official date is going to be pushed a little bit because we're working on cover design and formatting, and we want to have a good what do you call it? Reference in the back to be able to find, hopefully, so that it can be a good reference project for you. So that has been kind of a life project. I got into healthcare because of headaches, but ultimately, the reason headaches are so profound is because they tend to be sort of a priority. I mean, obviously, the head, the brain, and that is a priority for the body. So pain there is often the body trying to tell a story. And so we'll dive into, how to listen to our body, whether with or without headaches, as we go through. I was a natural bodybuilder originally. And so muscles and diet and nutrition were a big thing for me. And as I got into chiropractic school, got exposed to this approach called applied kinesiology, where everybody that I studied under seemed to have the answers or have the tools to figure out whatever walked in the door. And that's really why I got into healthcare, is I wanted to be able to help everybody, help my ailing fellow humans. And I studied a lot of other techniques during that time, and certainly all of that has been kind of melded into the applied kinesiology approach. And we all, practitioners, we are all an amalgam of our life experiences, right? And
Right.
so taking all those other approaches, and that's really what applied kinesiology is taking nutrition information, taking muscle knowledge and neurologic knowledge with acupuncture, and putting that together into a nice, succinct tool that can then have the tools to use labs, use, symptoms, patient's history, their diet, to figure out, even emotional triggers, to figure out, what the underlying cause is, and how to apply that to life and be better, be better off tomorrow. And, from this sort of venue, we were talking about offline a little bit, the beauty with the applied kinesiology and the muscle organ correlations is we can empower people to learn from their bodies and learn to listen to what their bodies are really trying to tell them, which is, for me, my favorite part, because there's only so much of me, and
Right.
it's more about helping people understand how to listen to their bodies more than like you need to see me, because again, that's limited to time and
Yeah.
space. So
I love that you have that approach. As you know, I specialize in autoimmune and chronic illness, and that's kind of the
right.
target audience for this podcast. And when you've been struggling with disease, and I mean, the average is what, like, 10 doctors in a few years before getting diagnosis. So, you have all these symptoms, you're feeling off, and you're looking for help, and everybody's dismissing you, right? Oh,
Right.
your labs look fine. You're just getting older, or you're just a woman, or you know what? Here's an antidepressant, so you leave me alone. And
Mhm.
you learn to not trust your body because you're told over and over and over again, basically, that you're crazy and a drama queen. And so, what I love,
Or king.
yeah, right, or king, right? And what I love about your approach in applied kinesiology is that your body is going, no, you're right, your body is trying to tell you something, just that
Right,
validation. And then learning, sometimes because we're so disconnected from our bodies, it's like our bodies are speaking Greek when we don't understand it, right? And so,
right.
and with, nutrition and just the holistic modalities available to us in our toolbox, right, we
Hmm.
start learning how to understand our symptoms.
Right.
That's where you and I can kind of help guide, but giving them the tools to move forward into health and own their health, and learn, like, oh, this is probably what's going on, and I'm going to need some help releasing this, or I know how to do it by myself. Like, that's just so huge in our world, I
Empowering.
think.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah,
Hmm. Hmm. That's it's a huge frustration for me, as a practitioner, hearing people's stories like that, that, and I was one. We probably told this story last time where I was having headaches, and my loving parents did the right thing, took me to our local family practitioner, and they said, "Oh, you might have an aneurysm. Don't work out," and all, that sort of stuff. And they said, "Well, you don't have an aneurysm. Go see a psychiatrist." And it's like, no, it's actually hurting it. I'm not making this up, right? And so, unfortunately, a lot of, sorry, doctors that are listening to this, but you know, um, a lot of practitioners, if they don't have the answer, then it's the patient's fault, and I think maybe that's part of what makes those of us in the holistic space or in the natural health space, uh, more of kind of who we are. Is if I don't have the answer, I want to find it, or if I'm unable to solve something for somebody, I'd love to hear back from them,
right,
a month later. Hey, I took lithium and now all of my problems are great, are gone. So then I can help the next person. So that's really what drives me clinically as a clinician. But again, it's also the frustration that I feel so sad for, the people that are just getting that info that, I don't, practitioners saying I don't have the answer. They're not going to come out and say that,
right.
but since I don't know exactly what the cause is, you're crazy, right? And, what a disservice that is to humanity ultimately, and a pride-filled response. So really, our platform, right, is to empower people that no, your body is talking to you, and it is up to us as patients, people, the health consumer
Right.
pursuing vitality, to try to learn to listen to it. And I'm a big fan of, use a log,
Hmm.
log what you eat, or what you went through. There's probably answers in there to help you understand what went on. I mean, much like people will log their blood pressure, right? And,
Yeah,
oops, after I went to Chinese food, now my blood pressure's through the roof. Oh, maybe I shouldn't be eating Chinese food,
right.
things like that. So logs is a nice, easy, free tool to start learning to listen to our bodies. And so we can talk about, some of those kind of key areas as we go through today, where applied kinesiology, again, is really empowering when we can look at those muscle organ correlations, because that is such a missing link in most of healthcare,
Yeah,
where every area of the body has a sign, much like reflexology, and reflexology is part of it. And a lot of that is all acupuncture that's been around thousands of years, long before, we were told that pharmaceutical answers were there.
right. So let's dive into this. So the muscle organ correlation, that's going to
Mhm.
be a foreign concept to a lot of people. Like how is,
Yes,
and so I would love to maybe demystify that for people.
great.
Okay.
Yeah. One of my original mentors, his college project to demonstrate the muscle organ correlation was the pec clavicular muscle is related to stomach function. And so what they did was inject so that they could do it without harming people. They injected ice cold water into the stomach and then were able to demonstrate that that pec clavicular muscle would become weak and tender. And so that was one of the early, back in the 70s, early approaches to prove out, if you will, or confirm that. Dr. Goodhart was the first one, the late great Dr. Goodhart was the first one to look at acupuncture meridians, and most of them are based on like where acupuncture meridians go right through or right along the muscle fibers. So when that meridian doesn't work, then that often will cause the muscle to not fire properly. We call it be conditionally inhibited. So then when somebody tries to move their shoulder and they can't move it all the way, then we look at what muscle is weak and causing that problem. So each muscle has an associated gland or organ with it. And so when it hurts in the pecclavicular muscle, for example, we know that, hey, that means there's a stomach issue. So we want to look at the stomach is it a nutritional deficiency? Is it something that person's eating? Is it the emotions associated with the stomach? Emotions with the stomach or things like oversympathetic, low self-esteem, disgust. So it could be that we had a season of that then has compromised the way the stomach's functioning. And we need to kind of functionally clear those emotions, if you will. And then actually the body will use nutrition better as well. Tying that back, I do a lot of emotional work on every visit, and by clearing the emotions, it very definitely reduces the amount of supplements a person would need. They might need two digestive enzyme type supplements per meal. Then we get rid of the oversympathetic stuff that happened to their kid or whatever, and then they may only need one of those pills in the morning instead of six a day. So it makes it nice and profound and more more affordable and
Hmm.
all that stuff as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think about people who are taking, $300 to $500 a month worth of supplements, right?
Yes, yes.
And what what I always, I've been in this world a really long time, and what's been very interesting over the last like maybe 4 or 5 years is seeing the emotional basically trauma, right? The emotional
Mhm.
response that when we don't properly clear it, it does not go away. It might not bother us mentally, but it gets stored in our body.
Right.
And so many people run away from those emotions, even when they come up. Like, I know people who just the thought of almost letting it go, they almost like run away from it,
Mhm,
right? Like
mhm.
it takes such bravery to be able to release those emotions. Is there a way that applied kinesiology can help people maybe bypass that aspect of it to release it? Like how would that work? Like, do you have to emotionally, mentally bring it up and process it, or is there a way to maybe help release it so the body and the mind can release it together in a less emotional way?
Yes, wonderful question. Let's empower our listeners. So the first step, we're in preventative medicine. The best way to prevent the storage of those emotions is to be minerally saturated. Minerals help us not physically store emotions as well, or as much. So eating our organic vegetables have, literally thousands of times the amount of minerals in them. So minerals will help us be more rock-like than sponge-like.
Oh, I
So we
like
don't.
that.
So if we eat sugars and, sad standard American diet, then we're going to be more sponge-like. We're going to take on emotions, and that's where chronic illness becomes a challenge, right? They've had an issue, and now every time emotion happens, then that's getting heaped on top of, coals on the fire, if you will,
Hmm.
to perpetuate that ailment. And that's where, clinically, then, oh man, this person's had it for 20 years. Now we've got 20 years of baggage to work backwards through. So prevention and exercise. I mean, exercise raises dopamine. That helps us feel like the world is okay and we're going to get through this, helps us collect our thoughts, organize our thoughts. So, that runner's high that of dopamine is another way to help sort through. I mean, that's where I write most of my presentations, is when I'm off riding my bike and, clearing my head, so to speak. So that's the preventative aspect of the emotional front, keeping ourselves well, keeping our adrenals healthy so we're rested and that stuff, and loading up on minerals. So then, God forbid, now something's happened, loss of a loved one, or, those emotions, then there are actually ways of kind of accessing it. The emotional points are right on the front of the forehead. So typically, even just putting the hand on the forehead, typically when I do this in clinic, I'm connecting it to the associated organ. Most people aren't going to know where those organ points are, that sort of stuff. So if a person puts their fingers on the thumb side of the wrist, that covers most of the organ points on, the right-sided organs, for example, if we're touching the right wrist, or the left-sided organs if we touch the three fingers on the thumb side of the left wrist. So typically, if ever since my dog, ever since Fluffy died, or, or spouse, said something or something blew up, you can kind of mentally access that emotion, put one hand on the forehead, with the other hand, touch those three acupuncture points on the wrist, on the thumb side, put the hand on the forehead, clear it, and then you can put the fingers on the other wrist, and then hand on the forehead and tuck your chin. That is a way of physically releasing. So the tucking of the chin is a neurologic release of old injuries. They've found out it's called a flexor withdrawal when we see an injury coming. Or in other words, if we look in the rearview mirror, it looks like the car's not going to be stopping behind us. Our inborn neurologic response is to protect the nervous system. So that's a flex backwards, basically tilting the head back and pulling the ankle joint up. Basically, that whole it's protect the spine, lean back over the spine. So this flexion of the chin is neurologically a way of saying it's okay. We can get rid of this now. We call it injury recall or injury release. And so if we know what the emotion is, we can think about what happened, touch those pulse points on the wrist and the forehead, tuck the chin, touch the other wrist, tuck the chin. That way we just kind of get every gland and organ by touching those sides on the wrist. Again, clinically, we would use the organ. We can actually get into, hey, at 10 years old, this is what happened, let's release it. So that will empower you. And I treat myself that way, often, and I realize, ooh, I have a little charge when, when I think about this or when this happens, so we can release it. The beautiful thing is, from a life perspective, that gets those anchors out of the way, because those adverse negative emotions hold us back. They are limiting. They end up being limiting beliefs. So if we can get rid of that, then we can go forth and be more gregarious and more cheerful and more prosperous, right? I mean, one of the things I often do with patients is, when things come up, then I'm like, they're struggling with money issues, right? And I actually have a dollar bill in the office, and be amazed how many people have a little allergy to money. We put money in their hands, and we can clear, their bill and help them make better choices, right? And be able to save and so on. I mean, fun example of this is a gal years ago that was always, not quite making it paycheck to paycheck and living on debt and so on. And in debt, just kind of did this on a regular basis with her. And now she owns a triplex, and she's got multiple businesses and making much better choices. Another example, sorry, ladies, but often a very common emotional paradigm with weight challenges for women is their first heartbreak. So,
Yeah.
often gals will tend to, like, that hurt. I don't ever want to have to go through that again. So if I carry a little extra weight, I'm not going to attract that kind of attention. So often we want to release those emotions associated with the first heartbreak so that the gals can love themselves better, right? And take better care of themselves. Whereas men tend to throw up stone on the heart and
Right.
like, I'm never going to fall in love again, so I don't get hurt again. So clearing that stuff can help us move forth, without the limiting beliefs like that. And the physical storage. I mean, it
Right.
compromises the way organs work. We talked about, it affects the way we use nutrients. it affects the way the muscles function. And then when the muscles don't function, long-term scenario, we start getting osteoarthritis if it's been there for a long time, or, then they need hip replacements or they have spine problems and
Hmm.
so on.
What is so interesting is like, again, just growing up in the allopathic model, we're kind of taught that everything is separate, right?
Yes. Hmm.
And what I love about applied kinesiology is everything is connected, mind,
Hmm.
body, all the organs are connected to, and then the mind is connected to. And so much of autoimmune disease stems from mineral deficiency and stress and
Right.
trauma.
Right.
And so many people get frustrated because this is what I run into as a nutrition focused health coach, is they feel like they're eating so well and they're not getting better,
Yeah.
right? And that's when I'm like, okay, we have to dive deeper, and here are some things that you probably need to find somebody to help you address,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Let's say somebody's in the thick of disease,
Okay.
and like I'm thinking of one particular new client that I have, that she's going on her third autoimmune disease, right? Just
Mm.
right. So it's just she's just not getting better. Now, of course, food is not great, so we're
Mhm.
addressing that. And she's just like, well, I'm retired now, so it's not that I don't have time, it's just this and that. And I can see that there's something going on, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think that, so if somebody's in the thick of disease, how can they start becoming more resilient? Obviously, we can release, but if they're still sponges,
Right.
like, so if when somebody's in the thick of it, what is kind of a baseline approach? Like, obviously, every individual is different, of course, but is there some sort of baseline approach in your methodology that maybe somebody, because again, I remember reading this statistic that only 10 to up to 20% of our health outcomes are dependent on outside, so doctors and
Mhm.
medicine and
Mhm. Mhm.
supplements and all that. The other 80 to 90% is truly ourselves, which can be daunting, but also
Right.
empowering.
Mhm. Right.
So if a patient was to come to you in the thick of disease, they're getting multiple diagnoses of autoimmune conditions. So we know that it's basically the body's just crying out louder and louder for help.
Right. Right.
What would be maybe a baseline approach for you that we would coach somebody to get started?
Right. Listen to the body. I mean, it's empowering. I mean, the challenge is when they have multiple autoimmune conditions, unfortunately, they almost guaranteed have leaky gut, and you're probably working with this person about for their leaky gut. The challenge with leaky gut is then they become sensitive to everything under the sun, and it makes
Mm-hmm.
it a little harder to figure out.
Right.
So, I mean, as a practitioner, my first call to action is hopefully hit a big old home run, so that empowers them. Like, wow, life is better. Okay, what else can I do? But ultimately, it's about empowering them to listen to their body instead of the like, but whatever, I need my coffee, or I need to eat pizza with the grandkids, whatever those are. Um, okay, next time you eat pizza, pay attention to how you feel afterwards, right?
Right.
Oh, I have brain fog. I fell asleep on the couch while the kids were playing video games, and so realize what the consequences are so that then they're empowered to like, hey, maybe it's not worth eating pizza and going down for the count and ultimately having, my knee pain and my neck pain and crashed immune system. So trying to empower them to listen to what their body's telling them. Of course, then we hear that I'm so sensitive now. It's like, yeah, now your head's out of the sand and you're listening to the body, whereas people were functioning in that 20% function kind of state
Mm-hmm.
and just not even listening to their bodies. So for me, try to say, okay, you've got this line, this list of symptoms. Most of them are digestive related. These are the symptoms that are going to happen when you eat foods that compromise your digestive system. Your allergies, your left-sided headache. Help them understand what happens before those symptoms come on, so that they know, oops, I did it again.
Mm-hmm.
Then I find that people are fairly empowered because at least they know what the consequences are. Doctor means teacher, translates to teacher, right? And so I'm trying to teach them how to listen to their body so they can make better choices. So starts fix the leaky gut,
Hmm.
right? Stabilize their immune system, help them understand the key players, so that then they can make better and better choices on the go forward.
I love that. So this is, from the nutrition side, what I usually help people with that. They're like, okay, I know I need to eat better. I don't know how to make it work. And that's where I come in because I do
Yes.
like meal plans and I listen to them and I meet them where they're at. Like this particular client, they love to eat out, right?
Hmm.
But they do that about once a day, sometimes twice. And so it was like, okay, well, if you don't like to cook and you don't like to do, well, what are some things that you enjoy eating?
Hmm.
And so here are the deficiencies that you have. Here are the things that are going to fix it. How can we make that work? Like, what will be easy for you? And what happens is they're really excited and they follow the plan for about 2 to 3 weeks. And then they quote unquote, and I hate this quote, but they fall off the wagon, right? Life
Hmm.
happens, something good, something bad, something stressful, whatever. And then all of a sudden they go, wow, I didn't realize how bad I was feeling until I was feeling good. And I didn't even know I was feeling good.
Right.
And it is super empowering and everybody looks at that as a failure and I'm like, goodness, no, that's such a win.
Right.
I want to encourage people that like when you start focusing, you start feeling better, and then you quote unquote, do something bad, quote unquote, I'm quoting my fingers because it's not bad.
Hmm.
Food is food.
Right.
And it's either food that loves your body or food that tears your body down. That's really the categories that it's in. And it's not that we need to remove morality from food. It is what it is. It's nutrition, it's information, one way or the other. And it's like when you realize, like, oh, this really does make me feel bad, that's not a failure. That's
Right.
just information. Your body's saying, hey, this hurts me and I need you to stop. And yes, you feel more sensitive to it. Oh, I have more allergies now. Oh, I have more this. No, you don't. You were just head in the sand and you were just so used to feeling bad. You didn't know what feeling good even felt like.
Right. Right.
We address nutrition where we're fixing the gut, we're giving the body the fuel that it needs to heal and function optimally, right?
Right.
But then the stored emotions, right?
Right.
So that's
Hmm.
so nutrition is first line, just so that we can start giving the body the fuel that it needs. Then when they come back, where do we go from there?
Hmm. Yeah. For me, clinically, it depends on what's going on, and it's always about trying to get to their priority. Backing up a little bit, I love the way you packaged that last statement. With helping people find what they can eat that is going to empower them. Because as clinicians, it's so easy to get caught up on, don't do this, don't, slapping them around, and I used to feel pride hurt, when they'd come back and oops, I ate. I went off the wagon again. Okay, you learned from it. Now you recognize the reason that you're making the choices you are, and that's going to empower a person to, I mean, I often say, the best clinical tool I could have would be a crystal ball. You keep eating this food, you keep doing what you're doing. This is what you're going to look like at 70 or 80 or 90 years old, if you made
If you
it.
make it that far. Mm-hmm.
If you eat these foods, you eat your organic vegetables, look at how much more vibrant you are. And you're now playing with the great grandkids and still playing soccer and baseball with them, instead of, being cared for in your hospital bed. So, I mean, that would, if we could figure out a way to create that crystal ball, which we're kind of trying to do. I mean, that's God giving us that option when
Right.
when they fall off the wagon, and there's that crystal ball, like this is what life could look like if you kept making the choices you were making, right?
Yeah.
So that is a powerful tool to motivate and inspire people. Pain is one of my favorite statements lately is pain is intended to inspire change, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
pain
Yeah.
pain motivates change. So if it's emotional pain, if it's physical pain, that pain was our gift to tell us what you're doing is not working so well.
Yeah.
So we're all hardwired to avoid pain.
Right.
So let's do it. So yes, clearing the emotions. We talked about how to prevent further emotions, but learning to listen to our bodies. We've talked a little bit about nutrition. Let's talk about some of the muscles related to nutrition, right?
Yes.
Or to diet or to digestion. So we talked about the pecclavicular muscle. The stomach is a left-sided muscle. So the muscle that like you would work doing bench press, that pecclavicular muscle gets weak when the stomach is not functioning. So that's kind of a starting point for digestion. We've got also the salivary glands that start with amylase. That's where carbohydrates start getting digested. That gland gets the parotid gland, and some of the salivary ducts get compromised if we had a person that has old amalgam fillings. So that's a potential compromise from the very start of the top of the digestive system. Then we have the stomach. Then we have the hiatal hernia. That's another real common one that people deal with. Most doctors treat it by trying to suppress stomach acid. It is actually more typically a gallbladder congestion that sets up hiatal hernia. So a person that's eating their trans fats, eating out all the time, or eating too many nuts and seeds, too many omega-6, which is omega-6 fatty acids, all those things, glyphosate, those are all real common triggers to compromise the way the gallbladder functions. Then a person's going to get that hiatal hernia where the diaphragm spasms and the stomach slips up through, gives them that pain in the sternum area, lower sternal area, and then the reflux, the burning, and so on. That's a gallbladder problem. The physical manifestations of gallbladder, right-sided headaches, that's always a gallbladder problem. The muscle behind the knee, it's called the popliteus muscle that prevents the knee from rotating too much or going backwards. That muscle will get weak when the gallbladder is compromising, or a person could even get what's called a Baker's cyst, where they get a cyst literally in the muscle in that area. Those are all signs that the gallbladder is compromised. So, and then emotions with the gallbladder, anger, frustration, resentment, those all potentially fit in there. The brain chemical for the gallbladder is acetylcholine. So when the gallbladder is compromised, the brain ends up deficient in that acetylcholine. So when acetylcholine is low, blood pressure goes up because of the constriction of the arteries. Recall gets compromised, so the person's going to have trouble coming up with the kids' names and or facts and figures that they know they should know. That's a sign that acetylcholine is low. Long-term consequence of that's Alzheimer's, right? In the pathological sense. So it's not age, right? It's your sign that there's some toxicity and we want to clean out the gallbladder. So those are some of the physical manifestations of gallbladder. We went stomach, gallbladder, small, and then we got enzymes that are in there. The pancreas secretes enzymes to help us digest foods. Physically, if enzymes are low, then that's the bloating, the gas, and sluggish metabolism, generalized achiness, like the arthritic feeling in the fingers and so on, joints. That's often a sign that enzymes are low. Enzymes, again, are very mineral dependent. So we need the minerals to make those enzymes. So, looking upstream, yes, giving enzymes supplementally as a clinician will help a person initially, or maybe that's their antidote for when they do go off the wagon or splurge.
Yeah.
But why is the body not making enzymes properly? Another kind of sidebar, unfortunately, concussions are a very common cause to reduce enzyme production.
Yep.
So sometimes we want to help the brain function better. I've been real excited about lithium lately, for example, is a mineral that is very good at quenching a lot of that old post-concussion trauma. Had a patient, a doctor actually, that had flown in to see me from another state and had the arm's length list of symptoms. And a lot of it started after she'd had two significant auto accidents, and she was basically disabled, unable to work or function for about a year because of the brain trauma. So I went through, and she had digestive problems and bloating, and her husband was a chiropractor. She was a practitioner. They were all both very capable, but nobody had the tools up to that point to correct a concussion. So the main thing I gave her was a product with lion's mane mushroom in there and lithium, and the lithium really makes a difference with concussions. And so it helps with the microglial function, which is a protection. It helps with neural regeneration. I was just talking to my brain trust partner this morning about this, where it quenches the glutamate, the neurologic byproduct of neurodegeneration is glutamate, like eating MSG all the time. So that's why that post-concussive person is in excitation all that. They're always kind of wound up, trouble falling asleep, and and hyper creative and kind of hyper driven, if you will, crash
Mm-hmm.
to the point of crash and burn. That's all concussion. Lithium is very helpful. Covering a lot of ground here.
Yeah, no, this is great.
So we've got enzymes that then help the small intestine break down foods where a lot of the assimilation comes. When the small intestine is not functioning, causes the quadricep muscles, the thighs, to not function properly. We just talked about enzymes. The muscle that specifically will, I find, to get weak it's called the vastus medialis. It's that kind of muscle right on the inside of the knee, next to the kneecap.
Mm-hmm.
That muscle will get weak when enzymes are not being produced properly, and then the kneecap doesn't track properly, and they have knee pain. Big conundrum. The challenge, frustration I see is, a person with knee pain and then takes anti-inflammatories for it, which further compromise the small intestine, and it just keeps a person in that vicious cycle.
Mm-hmm.
The muscle on the outside of the knee, it's called the vastus lateralis, of the four quad muscles. The one on the outside tends to get weak, specifically with leaky gut problems. So the person, like your autoimmune patient or colleague, that they're going to have weakness in that muscle. So that also is going to cause knee pain, as an indication that, oops, I just ate food that lit up my autoimmune problems and the leaky gut. So we want to get those areas functioning well. Small intestine affecting the knee that is when it's kneecap area, frontal knee weakness. That's virtually always a small intestine problem. Very common food to compromise that is artificial sweeteners. Aspartame tends to very much compromise the small intestine biota, the good bacteria that should be there, and it causes a weakness of those knee muscles. So if you're having, I was on a bike ride the other day and saw a person with the straps underneath the knee on both knees. I just want to scream at them, stop eating artificial sweeteners, Easy fix. So
Yeah.
that's the small intestine. Then big fun surprise for people is most low back pain is a large intestine thing. So we've gone from small intestine, now we're into the large intestine, which for those of you that are bored with my talk, now we're towards the end of the digestion.
Right.
But that's large intestine. So the quadratus muscle that attaches from the pelvic, the iliac crest, the top of the pelvis, to the bottom of the ribs, that whole square muscle in the low back there is related to the large intestine. And so when we eat something, corn is often a very surprise food, or dairy or something like that compromises colon function, then it's going to show up as a low back pain. And then they wake up in the morning feeling like an old person.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, that's our body saying, oops, that didn't work for me. In the early days when I'd splurge and eat pizza once in a while, I could tell if there was corn in the crust by how I woke up and how I felt the next morning. So it's not worth it. I don't splurge on any of that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and the IT band, the muscle on the outside of the leg, is large intestine related.
Oh.
So those athletes, the runners, cyclists that have the pain IT band syndrome, they call it. That's that iliotibial band, and the tensor fasciae lata technically is the muscle on the outside of the hip there. So outer hip pain, outer knee pain, those are all large intestine problems as well. Fun, simple kind of temporary fix, if you will, is the large intestine 4 is a very common acupuncture point. It's right on the thumb web. It's going to be painful on the side of the problem. So if they had IT band or, pain on the outside of the knee or hip on the right, then rubbing, it's going to be tender on that thumb web on the right side. They can rub that, and that will actually create some relief. Or if they have that right-sided low back pain, rubbing that will, help them get back to work and get going. The aha moment should be, oops, I ate pizza again, or I ate dairy or ice cream, or whatever the trigger was for the colon. But then you can kind of get yourself back to function temporarily, at least with that large intestine 4 acupuncture point on the thumb.
Well, what emotions are stored there? Because I remember I heard about this back surgeon who would make every patient do 3 months of psychological treatment. They'd have to meet with a psychologist for 3 months, and
Okay.
90% of them never came back. It solved their lower back pain. Unless
Right.
it was a physiological, there was an injury of some sort, right? But a
Right.
lot of it ended up being emotional, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. That's when I kind of got introduced to this whole trauma, emotion, body connection.
Awesome. Yeah.
And, and then it's just come up way more since then. So what emotions are typically associated with that?
So the lung and the large intestine share the emotional paradigm. The very common emotions for that are grief, sadness, yearning, compelled to neatness, cloudy thinking. Those are emotions that tend to get stored in the lungs, large intestine. So super common one for I lost my mom in January. That was a grief-stricken time,
Mm-hmm.
right? That was fairly sudden. She did not take care of herself, unfortunately. Made a lot of lived on diet soda, most of my life. So she had a lot of knee problems. She had both knees replaced, and she was losing her brain was going because of the neurodegeneration. Unfortunately, it is a neurotoxin, toxic to the nerves, neurotoxin. She had, and her kidneys failed. So all signs of, basically her cause of death was diet soda, diet soda, diet soda.
Right.
Brain, kidney, and
Knees.
organ failure,
Yeah.
knees, and so on. So where was I? So the emotions, yeah, with large intestinal are grief, sadness, yearning. So grief is a massive
Yeah.
one. There's homeopathics to help with that, but understanding, oops, ever since mom passed, we can touch over the large intestine or touch those points on the pulse points on the wrists and clear the forehead. That helped me get through that season better. I know a lot of people, unfortunately, that ended up with lung cancer,
Mm-hmm.
ever since the traumatic grief-stricken event. If it's not properly addressed, right, then it can lead to big problems.
Right. Right. That's really good to know, because I know low back pain, especially, I'm going to be turning 40 here soon. And,
Mm.
everybody's complaining about lower back pain, hip pain, knee pain,
Yep.
ankle pain.
Right, right,
Those are like, and then some people just wake up and they're so stiff for like 30
mhm,
minutes and they just can't move. Like it's so painful for them.
right.
And I'm just kind of hearing, sounds like you need to get your minerals up, which is not
Yes,
surprising for anybody that I'm thinking about. That's very interesting. And I think that's really helpful. Like that's empowering to be like, okay,
totally.
my lower back is literally killing me. Maybe I don't need surgery. Maybe I do need to go to therapy and release some of this grief, or applied kinesiology
Right,
and release, we need to find relief and release and for that grief. I think grief is the
right.
biggest one that I can think of, is whether it was like a blindsided divorce or a death in the family, or something like that. Like it every person that I know of that has lower back pain went through something traumatic, and that's when it started.
For sure. And you talked about the dietary solutions, right? Best source of minerals is organic vegetables. What's the best thing for the colon?
Organic
Organic
vegetables.
vegetables.
Yep.
So then we get the folate in there, right? The folic acid and folate that will rebuild.
Hmm.
The intestine is a rapidly regenerating tissue. Skin and the intestine are basically similar. That is very folic acid dependent. Veggies are our best source of folic acid
Hmm.
to help rebuild and heal that intestinal lining, because that has to it regenerates almost daily, whereas the liver is basically a year
Right.
to regenerate liver cells. So I mean,
Yeah.
veggies as a prevention for the low back, for sure. I was kind of looking at the time because you mentioned ankle. That brings up the body's response to stress.
Okay, let's talk about it real quick.
I'm like, that's a big old subject, and I'm sure it's going to be relevant for everybody.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because in the last like 2 years, over and over and over again, and this is just friends or just like things that people say in passing, was just like, man, when I wake
Yeah.
up, my
Mhm.
ankles, like I can't walk. Like I feel like I can't walk
Right.
for 10 to 30 minutes. Like I have to like move them around and all this stuff. So let's talk about it.
Right. So my gift is applied kinesiology, my unique offering in the world. So let's talk about the physical manifestations of stress. Low back pain, the pelvis tends to rotate. Those people that are getting adjusted by a chiropractor. L5 is going to go out, which is the very lowest back, where most people are going to have disc problems. The muscle kind of broad line for ladies, the vertebra T9 is the circuit breaker for adrenals. So we're talking adrenals, adrenaline, the whole fight or flight mechanism. When they're in that, when they're exhausted from being in that mode all the time, that brow line T9 area is going to need adjusting or be tender. The L5 low back, then the pelvis rotates. It's called the posterior ilium. That's going to rotate because of the weakness of the sartorius muscle. Sartorius for seamstress, that basically goes from that front of the hip bone there down to the inside of the knee. And then similarly on the back and to the inside of the knee, that's muscles called the gracilis. Those two muscles get weak when the adrenals, when the body's not handling adrenaline or stress properly. And so then we have those vertebra areas, the low back pain, the other muscles associated with this muscle called the posterior tibialis, and then both calf muscles. So those are four primary stabilizers of the ankle that creates a weakness when that posterior tibialis muscle holds the two ankle bones together, the knee bones, if you will, kind of that outer ankle. So it holds those together. It also supports the arch of the foot. And so when that adrenal related posterior tibialis muscle gets weak, then the arch starts to collapse. And so that's that flat foot, the plantar fasciitis, hugely common and popular right now, right? That's an adrenal problem. So plantar fasciitis, that dropping of the arch is an adrenal problem because the muscle that should support the arch gets weak. With that chronic cortisol, tendons and ligaments get weak as well. So that the POTS is hugely popular right now, the positional orthostatic hypertension, basically hypotension. So where the ligaments also get weak with that. And so that's the muscle that supports the arch, and then the tendons and ligaments of the arch of the foot get weak. So over long term, if we're chronically adrenally fatigued, then we end up getting bunions because we're walking off the foot sideways and, dropping the arch instead of toeing off straight and proper. So all that creates the weakness in the ankle. So, when a person comes in, no, I sprained my ankle yesterday, did somebody take you out in a soccer game? Was it somebody else's fault, so to speak, or did it just roll, right? When the adrenals, when we're handling stress properly, then the body's going to correct. When we step on a gopher hole or, step over a rock or something or a curb, the body's going to correct and move on, and we wouldn't think any different. But when we've had an overabundance of stress or the body's not handling that stress properly, then that's when we're going to roll the ankle or have that inner knee problem. People often have medial meniscus problems and knee problems on the inside of the ankle. That is virtually always an chronic adrenal problem.
That's very interesting because I've had issues with that too. Like when I was I think it was my senior year of college, and I was pushing through. My junior year, I had done like 18 hours and 19 hours each semester. And I rolled my ankle in a corn maze. And the doctor was like, it would have been better if you'd broken your ankle because I pulled the tendons so hard.
Right.
But I noticed, like he told me it'd be weak the rest of my life, but I noticed that it only gets weak when I'm stressed, which is, I'm like putting two and two together. That's so interesting. And yeah, in our 40s, we're usually that sandwich generation. We're raising kids, our parents are getting older, we're working, we're moving up in our careers, so we have more stress career wise. Oh, that's super interesting. Yes. This has been so good.
That's your body telling you to slow down, right? Your ankle. Yeah. A perfect example of listen to our bodies. And so there you go. Now you have a tool to recognize. So for me, it's typically when I'm training for a race. If I have I do a lot of bike and mountain bike racing in the endurance side. So I was in an 8-hour mountain bike race and had my food all figured out. Of course, leading up to that, I'm training crazy, and then I'm into this ride and doing a little bit of caffeine to be inspired for the race. But all that tends to set me up for leaky gut. And then I'm going to respond to react. In that circumstance, I've reacted to water. I've reacted to cocoa in the protein snacks that I was eating during the ride. So anyway, that's my body yelling at me, like, back it down,
pushing
buddy.
Too hard.
Burying yourself.
Yeah. It's so easy for us to do, to just keep pushing ourselves. I've had to learn to step back a lot, and it is not easy at all. And a lot of people, they don't like to take vacations, or vacations are not, you're visiting family instead of actually getting away. And Yeah, we
Mm-hmm.
just, especially in modern American culture, we just push ourselves all the time, no matter what.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. Balance. Balance is
it
a beautiful
is. It
thing.
is. Well, this has been an incredibly helpful and informative discussion. Thank you so much. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you would like our listeners to walk away with? Like if they remember one thing, what would it be? And then how can they find you and connect with you?
Thank you. Yeah, let's wrap it up with pain is your body. Pain is intended to elicit change. So when you hurt, that is the warning light on the dash. That is your car tells you when it's low on gas or when the tire is low or overheating. Pain is that warning light for us. And the reason headaches are such a fun topic for me from our episode, I think it was 120 that we did. Headaches tend to tell actually even what the priority weakness or threat is for the body. So learn to listen to those. Hopefully you can figure it out yourself or find practitioners that are capable in helping you figure these out so that you can make the appropriate changes and thrive and be all that God has had you to be for to move forward. So listen to your body is really what I'd most like to instill and help people understand from what we learned today or we talked about. Headacheadvantage.com is the website for the release of the book. You can get updates that way. I send out regular emails and things through that. And then I'm on social media, Dr. Vrzal, Vrzal on Facebook or Instagram and that stuff. I put kind of fun,
Yes, you
quippy little
do.
pearls on
Yes,
there.
you
Oh,
do.
thank you.
I've learned some fun things. Like you did one where you were like poking, and I was like, dang. So yes, I can
Big drill to imitate the
yes,
dentist.
yes. You do so I would say definitely follow you on Instagram. That's my favorite
Well, thank you.
social media venue, I guess. Platform. Thank you.
Platform.
So awesome. Well, thank you again so much for coming on. This, like I said, this has been so informative. It was the best way I've heard applied kinesiology explained. And I think
Nice.
that it's an amazing tool in the toolbox. Do you know how people can find practitioners that use applied kinesiology?
The website is International College of Applied Kinesiology. So it's ICAKUSA, .com, and there's a find a practitioner. You can put in the zip code and it'll take you to, people in that area. They have, there's credentialing in there. So, DICAK, Diplomate of International College of Applied Kinesiology, or PAK. Those are kind of the upper level credentialing for applied kinesiologists to help them find somebody in their area. Then the emotional front, most of the emotional work I do is through NET, neuro-emotional technique. So NET Mind Body, netmindbody.com. Is the website that also will help a person find practitioners that are versed in the emotional tough stuff that we talked about today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again.
Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. If you found this episode helpful, would you do me a favor and help others find it by leaving a review, sharing a screenshot on social media, or sharing the link with a friend? By you sharing what you've learned, others are able to find this podcast and join our community. Be sure to check out my website, www.roadtolivinghole.com, for over 160 delicious recipes, a variety of meal plans, and a blog packed full of even more healthy living tips. If you'd like to learn more about how to work with me as your coach, you can schedule a free consult through www.roadtolivinghole.com/health-coaching/. Until next time, friend. Bye.